Hello, dear colleagues. Today we continue our course about IT technologies and e-health. My name is Konstantin Koshchkin. I am associate professor in Sechenov University, Department of Digital Health, and today we will cover mathematical methods in medical data processing. Our aim areas of interest in this part of our course, and I need to say that it is the end of our course, and maybe there will be something in addition, but according to our initial program, it's all what we planned. And today we'll cover scientific methods in medicine, fundamentals of statistical methods, machine learning. I will also cover some issues regarding artificial intelligence, which we didn't told about in our previous lectures. And of course, I will aim on implementation of these technologies because we are not covering technological and mathematical basis of this area, but it is an application of these technologies in medicine course, and my major goal is to tell about how to apply this in our area of study. So, in general, this area is being called data science, and data science is a very wide branch of computer sciences that study problems of data analyzing, data processing, data mining, and in this area we apply technical solutions to automate these activities. They will implement statistical methods, and also it's totally related to artificial intelligence because all these algorithms are based on statistics and equations which we use in data mining processes of that data science. And talking about data mining, we need to say that there are several areas in which this process in general could be structured. At first, we need a sample of information with which we are going to work with. We need a data set, and it must be large enough and contain sufficient information that we will be able to extract with our methods, and it will be analyzed, should be analyzed in a limited amount of time. So in major cases, we will need to make a sample of general data set to start our work with. Next step is exploration of this data. On this stage, we use visual interpretation of this data, statistical analysis, and interpretation of the results of this analysis. On this stage, we need to understand what is the data with which we are working and detect some relations between different variables in this data, and prepare ourselves for what we're going to do with this data on next steps. After that, we will be able to modify certain parts of this data set, so it will allow us to enable next steps of analyzing. It could be transformations, filtering, substitution of information, replacements, and so on. Next step will be creation of a model which we will use to analyze this data. It could be based on artificial neural networks, decision trees, regression analysis, and all other types Of course, there could be more basic statistical methods of analysis. And after that, we are able to compare these models with each other and assess their results, so we will be able to choose the best algorithm to process this data. On this scheme, we can see that our process will be consists of several stages, and different type of people are involved in this process. So we need to start with retrieving data, and data engineers could be involved in this process. After that, we'll need to clear data that we received, process it, and in many cases, the data processing is involved with unqualified manpower. For example, it could be data entry into the database or something similar. Next step is data exploration, and on this step we have data analysts. It's a qualified person who could use data analysis to find some relations between different sets of data. Next step will be creation of data model, and here we have data scientists. It's a more qualified person who is able to create a more complicated automated, for example, algorithm to analyze this data on a stream. And after that, we'll need to proceed with interpretation of the data we have and analyze how we can use it in future, plan our activities, and all these stages have different types of tools, and in most of the cases we will have software programs. For example, it could be database management software, spreadsheets management software, analytical tools, programming languages, and so on. So let's talk about basics, what forms could be for our data. It could be qualitative or quantitative, so it could be some categories or numbers. Numbers could be discrete and continuous. For example, discrete numbers will be persons in the line, and continuous could be, for example, temperature in the room. And qualitative could be nominal or sequential, and there could be different types for data. Actually, we choose types of data multiple times in different programs. For example, in our spreadsheet management tools, we could choose what we're working with. Is it data, or is it numbers, or is it text, or something like that? Of course, the same types of data we could choose in statistical packages for analyzing, and programming languages operate with data types, and variables could be defined in which data type they will operate. It could be numeric, integer, characters, logical, complex data types, and in more complicated cases, we are able to work with vectors, lists, matrices, arrays, factors, tables, data frames, and so on. And when we need to store this data in database management tool, we will also have a lot of types of storage. So we are able to define type of data which will be allowed in a certain field of the database. And this definition of data type will help us in future, and we will not be able to load, for example, text in the area for numbers, and it will not affect our future calculations. For many years, there was a very popular tool for data analysis. It's called OLAP cubes, and this data structure allow us to analyze multidimensional information and to extract data in slices from there and create analytical processing without additional steps to extract this data from external data sources. There are several definitions what we need, so we are able to call our data to be used available to be used in OLAP format. It should be multidimensional, transparent, accessible, stable, and these dimensions should be independent. And in many cases, when we are talking about OLAP, we have multi-user access, client-server architecture, and so on. So let's take a deeper look on cycle of work with data. There are several concepts how to achieve this problem, and one of the popular is so-called CRISP, and it consists of these stages. It will be understanding the business under this data, understanding the data for which will be used in our solution, data preparation, simulation, evaluation of the results, introduction, and monitoring and refinement of the data. And under understanding the task, we mean that goal is clear for us why we're analyzing this data. Of course, to understand the task, we need to have expertise in this knowledge domain. So, for example, to be able to assess data in a certain area of medicine, it's good if you have medical qualification in this area. And on the other hand, we have mathematical problem to understand. So we, as an expert in this area, will need also mathematical and statistical knowledge to apply required algorithms on this task. On the preparation and understanding stage, we will need to verify availability of the data and talk with experts for to get deeper understanding of this dataset and information. For example, our experts could be asked how the problem is being solved currently without this data analysis, what factors have influence on this data, what values this data could take, how the amount of data changed from 1 month to another, and is this data stable or it's changing multiple times from the short period of monitoring. One of the most important criteria of data is it technically acceptable for future analysis? And to understand is it so, we need to assess, is it complete, is it correct, are all fields in the datasheet have required data input, or we will need to substitute it with something derivative from other sources or other fields. There shouldn't be any conflicts of data in similar cases. For example, if we have some medical problem related to women's, there shouldn't be a sign that this person is a man. It's a basic example. Other examples could be that we check that some numbers are not negative, and for example, that age of our patient isn't more than 2000 years, something like that. On the simulation stage, we're able to implement special tools. For example, we could use Python, and it's very simple analytical language with lots of built-in solutions and available frameworks to analyze data and create a prototype of data evaluation, and we need, on this stage, we need to confirm our ideas how this data could be analyzed and processed in future. And when everything is done and our system is implemented, we'll need to keep monitoring how it's working and keep it with the changes in initial data. Statistics in healthcare is a very important area, and there are a lot of specialized questions related to this, and I will just name them. It's formulation of hypotheses, types of errors, statistical tests, types of research, examination of data, application of mathematical methods, and so on. When we're talking about hypotheses, it will be in general two types of hypothesis. One will be null hypothesis and alternative to it, and it's basic statistical terms which are used to determine errors. And talking about errors, we will always have two types of error. First type, it is false negative, when something is true, but our procedure marks it as negative, and it's an error of first kind. And error of the second kind is rejection of null hypothesis when it's false. So it's a basic area of statistical data interpretation, and it is being used in, I guess, all statistical experiments. And the situation when these errors will occur will be related in general to samples which we use, and if our sample is not representative of, not not enough representativeness of the general data, we will have errors applying it to general categories. So calculation of sample size is very important, and we need to keep it in confidence interval, so we will be able to use it to apply to our data. To test our method, we'll have two metrics. It's sensitivity, and it reflects the proportion of positive outcomes that are correctly identified, and specificity that reflects the proportion of negative results that are correctly identified. And the specific metrics for medicine are morbidity. It's a medical and statistical indicator that determines the number of diseases registered for the first time in a calendar year among the population living in a particular territory. It's one of the criteria for assessing the health of the population. And disease level, a medical and statistical indicator that determines the prevalence of registered disease, both newly emerged and pre-existing, for which there were primary appeals in a calendar year. And the distribution of this data, how we will be able to present it on visual graphs, is related to type of information. For example, categorical data is better to present on pipe diagrams, and quantitative data should be presented in graphs, and it will enable us to see the amounts for each section. There are two types of statistics, parametric and non-parametric. For parametric, it is average, confidence interval, displacement, multiple peaks, and parametric statistics is a section of statistics that assumes that the sample belongs to a population that can be reasonably accurately and adequately modeled by a probabilistic distribution with a certain set of parameters. Arithmetical mean is a variation of an average. It's defined as a number equal to the sum of the numbers of a set divided by the number. And the confidence interval is a term used in mathematical statistics in the interval estimation of statistical parameters, preferable with a small sample size than a point. Non-parametric statistics will be related to median, quartiles, interquartile scope, decile, percentile, and so on. Non-parametric statistics is a section of statistics that's not based solely on parameterized families of probability distributions. For example, median is a mathematical statistics, a number that characterizes a sample if all sample elements are different, then median is such a number that half of the sample elements are larger than and the other half is smaller. Quartiles are values that divide the data table into 4 groups containing approximately equal number of observations. In descriptive statistics, a decile is any of the 9 values that divides sorted data into 10 equal parts, so that each part represents 1/10 of the sample population. Percentile is a measure used in statistics that indicates the value below which a certain percentage of observations in a group of observation falls. Let's talk about classification of different types of studies. In relation to hypotheses, it will be exploratory studies or confirmatory studies. By position of the researcher, it will be observatorial studies or experimental studies. By purpose of the study, it will be descriptive study or analytical study. By observation time, it will be cross-sectional study or longitudinal study. And longitudinal studies are divided into retrospective studies and prospective studies. On this slide, we can see a level of trust for different studies and their results. On the top of this pyramid, there is systematic reviews which accumulate multiple studies and metadata in these studies and are able to provide a summary of huge amount of work under them. Next step is randomized clinical studies, and this type of studies is one of the most trusted ones, and it is being widely used in healthcare. Next one is cohort studies, when we will analyze group of cases, and the next one case control studies, cross-sectional studies, and series of cases. In case control study, we analyze two groups of data based on some factor, and we're trying to find differences into these two groups and correlations in data deviation. Control studies, cohort studies are being used to analyze multiple cases and provide summation of results in this group of cases. Randomized clinical studies are being used in a control form when we have a general group divided into two subgroups randomly, and one of these groups will be intervened with some actions, and other group will be control one, and in the end we will compare these two groups and their results. Systematic reviews and meta-analysis are summation of all previously done works in this area and application of mathematical studies on it. So we are applying a theory of chances on individual cases and applying mathematical statistics methods to analyze this information, create a model, and receive meaningful results. This is being widely used in epidemiological modeling, and in this area we'll have systematic literature review and patient research, metadata analysis, and data mining, collection of results from statistical reports, creation of a research database. Then on these multiple cases and information, we will apply mathematical and statistical analytical methods and build a model to create medical, demographical, or sociological data results, and based on them we will be able to create some predictions and analysis. Another area of application is related to pharmacoeconomics, and of course it is better for our patients to use more efficient methods, and when we are talking about state level, we should think not about a single person that we're helping, but the total population, and in some cases it is better to use more cheaper and less effective method on a wider population than use very expensive method to help a few persons and leave all other patients without help, because we're always working with limited budget in healthcare, unfortunately. And in more scientific areas of healthcare, we will be meeting these methods in pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. And in these branches of pharmacology, we will calculate biological processes and activities of pharmaceutical substances on person, and how this results is being changed with addition of medical substances. And of course, in clinical trials, we will need to have a lot of statistical analysis of the results on different stages of these trials. And going to the more interesting part, we'll talk about machine learning methods, how we are able to apply and when we are able to apply them on our data. So the most basic method is regression. It's a prediction of values based on previously available data, and it is quite easy to calculate. And there are a lot of models built using regression methods. In most of the cases, we are talking about creating a classifier, and the main goal of classifier is to divide a group of data from another group, and it is quite easy in two-dimensional space, but it will be much more complicated if our space consists of hundreds or thousands of different parameters. So it will be multi-dimensional space, and it's not so easy to apply a single line function to create this classification. For example, one of the simplest way of applying classifier is one-dimensional separation, and it could be applied, for example, on some data being gathered in time to distinguish two peaks of data related to some object detection. For example, these methods are under the hood in iris recognition, and a major goal here is to reduce errors of first kind, so we will be able not to have a false results to pass the classifier as a true result. And in this case, we will optimize our algorithm to minimize first error of first kind. Talking about classification in of the multiple criteria and multiple objects, we'll talk about feature spaces, and this classification is based on comparing to the which group a certain object is have more relations with, and it's so-called nearest neighbor, and in this case we will calculate who is the nearest, what are the nearest objects to the detecting one, and based on this criteria we will be able to determine to which group it belongs. And in multiple cases this criteria of likelihood is called K, and this method is K nearest neighbors method, and it's being used to determine the reliability of likelihood of this objects being belong to the neighbors. So K nearest neighbors method is a method for solving classification problems and regression problems based on finding the nearest objects with known values of the target variable. Another way to classify objects is linear separation, and its goal is to create a line with best results to divide one object from type of objects from another. And this line could be in hyperspace when we have multiple parameters of these objects, and it will be called hyperline in this case. Another very popular method is support vector machines. This method solves the problem of classification and regression by constructing of nonlinear nonlinear plane as separating solution for this classification. And due to particular nature of feature space in which boundaries are being built, a support vector machine has a high degree of flexibility in solving regression and classification problems of various levels of complexity. But unfortunately, in many cases, it's impossible to solve classification problem with linear functions, and in this case we will have more complicated solutions. For example, nonlinear separation. It's a group of methods applied here, and in some cases it's possible to convert objects that we're analyzing their features into space where we will be able to apply linear function for this separation. So it could be also done with data conversion. And getting back to our artificial intelligence technologies, we can see that these methods are under the hood in basic of patterns recognition, and these patterns could be found with application of statistical functions on objects and classification of them. Another way how we could classify similar objects is applying of decision trees. Decision trees are basically a list of questions. Answering to them, we will be able to provide a result. In computer science, these questions are used to feature testing, and we could find objects going through this tree to be gathered in the similar branches by common answers to this tree processing. And interesting feature is that this decision tree we do not need to create it manually as on paper. It could be done automatically with training with predetermined training dataset, and based on this learning dataset, we can create this decision tree and apply this decision tree on future cases. And the good feature of this method is that in this case we will be always able to prove the path that our case have gone, and it is easy for us to find out why this case was classified in a certain branch of this tree. And it is very important in healthcare, for example, when we need to be sure how these results were achieved. As we talked previously, when we apply neural networks, it will be always uncertainty, and it is based on level of confidence that this object should be in this group. But applying decision tree, it will be a provable result, and we could always go back and check why this object is there. So now we're getting closer to machine learning. In machine learning, we have three major areas of major parts. It's Model selection, it's a method which we will apply on our data set. Next one is pattern recognition. It is similarities in our data, which will allow us to analyze it and, of course, output what results we need to achieve. What tasks could be done with machine learning? It is classification, when we need to divide some object from another. Localization, we need to find object on image, for example, or in dataset. It is detection when the result is coordinates or some data. Segmentation, when we need to cut out some part of image, and image conversion. There are three types of processing which are available, for example, for images. It could be applied not to image also, but all other types of dataset. The first type of application will be related to some classical statistical methods, and we'll have an object, a dataset with which we are working. We will need to calculate features that we will need to find, that it is being done manually, and after that the specialist who created this, who found these features, will create rules to divide one object for another. For example, it could be calculation of color, and if we have some bright object, we will determine that it is light that was turned on somewhere, and something like that. In this case, we do not need any training, because our rule is hard-coded into the algorithm. Another type of application is machine learning, when we have features detected by specialists, and the specialist created a machine learning method which will analyze the future data receiving in pipeline, and the results will be provided by the system, and this algorithm could be trained previously on marked data. And of course, the third way is to apply neural networks, and if we're talking about images in general, now it is convolutional neural networks, and these features are being found automatically, and this process will analyze the data, and our role is only to determine the training dataset and test dataset, and to confirm that this level of certainty of results in this neural network is acceptable for us. Currently, we have a lot of progress in this area, and we have a huge history, and it's not something new, actually. For now, we have only bigger amounts of data, and this data is digital, and we have computing power to analyze it. So current state of data science is based on previous years of hard work. So currently, machine learning is one of key informational technologies nowadays, and its most successful application of artificial intelligence, and these methods are displacing expert systems and knowledge engineering, and these methods enable us to give results in complex spaces of features, and we're able to apply them on huge amounts of data in real time. So it's a tool for big data processing. there are a lot of different methods, and we're able to apply multiple methods on the same data and to compare results to choose the best one. And there are thousands of applications of these methods and lots of publications to dig in and to use their experience. So in most of the cases, it will be training with a teacher. When we apply a training data set, apply the algorithm, and on the next stage we will apply selected trained algorithm on new object and receive results. There are multiple examples of application of machine learning. In medicine, it will be diagnosis, treatment, risk outcome for patients. There are a lot of applications in geology, process control. In banking, it's being applied for credit rating scoring, and it will calculate should bank give the loan to the client or not. Customer behavior analytics, sales forecasting, and so on. Most common to all of us is application in internet technologies, for example, in information search. Level of relativity to the certain query of the documents in databases are being calculated. There is a lot of applications for advertising, selecting most useful banners and text messages based on previous data on this user. And of course, in recommendation systems, we are able to provide recommendations based on lots of previous queries of this user, using them as features and trying to find the similar but not already in the dataset of this user. So it's a basic task of classification. Of course, there will be application in machine translation, speech processing, and creation, computer vision, detecting objects on video, and so on. More complicated area of current research is reasoning modeling, and in this area our studies are very complicated, and here we aim to understand how humans are thinking, and we're trying to develop strong artificial intelligence, and it is a very ethically complicated area of research. Modeling of reasoning implies the creation of symbolic systems for certain tasks, and these systems should be able to process information with complex algorithms and apply theorems for decision making, game theory, planning, dispatching, forecasting, and so on. In many cases, these reasoning models are related to natural language recognition, and in these cases, we're trying to create a so-called robot which will understand us and which will be able to answer us and pass so-called Turing test. And this test is based on are we able to define is it a robot or is it another human. In many cases, when we need to create some expert system or artificial intelligence, we need to have knowledge behind this system, and knowledge gathering and engineering is a very important area of research. And knowledge is not so easy to obtain because in many cases it's not systemized, not structured, and it's hard to define how it should be written down. As we previously described in expert systems, there are two parts in knowledge-based systems. It will be data gathering and processing when we apply the system to search for new knowledge, new data, and another part will be related to accumulation and processing of this data to use it in some other cases. More simpler area is pattern recognition. For example, it could be applied for character recognition and, for example, handwriting, speech processing could be solved with machine learning. And it is very useful in modeling of biological systems also. And biological systems modeling is a complex area where we are able to apply neural networks as well as machine learning techniques. And nowadays we're talking about genetic approach when we will allow one algorithm to change another and apply combination of algorithms. So we are training machine learning to find the best algorithm to solve this problem. So it's some kind of combination of different algorithm in automated system. And there is a lot of applications in robotics, and we have separated tasks to be solved in this area: object recognition and data processing, decision making, and so on. Neural networks can be used in medicine in different ways. For example, a patient could make a query on his symptoms, and the neural network will analyze thousands of millions of information cards, health records related to similar symptoms, and provide some recommendations for this patient. Of course, level of certainty for such recommendations are quite low, and it could be used as a recommendation for doctor or something like that. One of the most important application for neural networks in healthcare is data search, data study, and knowledge gathering from scientific publications. And it is very important because there are a lot of publications and it's impossible to analyze them manually, and having such a system in place, so we will be able to have recommendations based on proven results published in journals, and we will be able to update our medical knowledge much faster than in current situation. Also, we could apply artificial intelligence for planning, and in many cases it is a very complicated task when we have lots of patients, lots of doctors, and there are different time slots, and when our patient need to visit multiple doctors at the same day, we should process the most effective path for this patient and the most effective time management for doctor. Also, neural networks are able to help us in predictions of serious changes in healthcare and health situation for a certain patient, and it could be used in personal medicine and in epidemiological studies to control changes in the level of disease. And in personal cases, we're able to apply a wearable device to control certain parameters of health of the person, and AI system on the background monitoring this data and warning us if based on gathered data that something bad could happen with this patient, and it should be provided additional help and control. Another good example of application is skin cancer control, and there are several applications currently, mobile apps for example, which enable us to take a picture of our skin part of a certain area of our skin, and this system will find some objects with different color or shape and provide a recommendation if we should visit a doctor to test it for melanoma or other types of skin disease. Another way of application is pregnant women support and control, and there are a lot of parameters to analyze, and it could be also used to create some estimations on situation with health of these patients. In new drug development, we have a very important task to test different substances, is it effective or not, and testing them is very expensive, and if we have digital model of certain organ of human as a whole, we're able to apply these tests in digital form, and our AI-based solutions are able to propose structures of effective molecules based on multiple parameters of the patient. And another application is to find existing molecules being used for treatment of other diseases if they will be effective on another indication based on data gathered from their use, and so this could be used as a retargeting tool for this. In recent years, doctors have considered antibiotics resistance to be a very serious medical problem worldwide, and antibacterial drugs are now used everywhere, and the bacteria adapt to the effects. So in case of illness, drugs may not have a desired effect. This applies to the treatment of both simple and common diseases and treatment of serious diseases. To deal with this problem, it's necessary to constantly look for analogies of already available antibiotics, but this is very difficult and time-consuming process if you perform it manually, and it's much easier to solve the problem with the help of artificial intelligence. A group of researchers, which include specialists from multiple countries, developed an algorithm capable to quickly process large databases. Therefore, it's expected that with the help of creation of antibacterial drugs will take a very short amount of time. Development of AI currently affects all countries in the world, and we consider that introduction of smart systems in medical field will benefit to increase results in healthcare, diagnosis of diseases, and so on. And the practice and experience of doctors will be much better with help of such systems, and these systems will help to analyze huge amounts of data. Advanced scientific literature will be much faster applied in practical healthcare, and time between some scientific discovery to application in treatment will be much shorter. Today, artificial intelligence cannot solve complex medical problems. It's not possible to have independent AI-based robotic surgeon or something like that, but it is a good tool to help doctors and improve their performance. But they're able to apply on simple tasks, for example, in radiology to identify certain areas affected, or in pathology to identify cancer cells in cytological material, and results in these areas are about 90%, which is similar to human results. Lots of progress is in this area is related to IBM Watson, and it was several years ago when this division was launched by this corporation, and they have multiple solutions to provide for healthcare, and there are examples of results in oncology to search signs for disease, for example. Google also developing its own medical AI systems, and they're, for example, analyzing eye images to identify primary symptoms of blindness. Another example is related to CT scans, and for example, it could be used to analyze if the patient will have a stroke in a short time. Currently, for patients, we have a lot of applications related to mobile devices and mobile applications. There are solutions to apply cardiograms at home, and they have artificial intelligence tools under the hood also. There are tools for well-being control of the patients, and in more complicated cases, there are tools which are being used by cancer patients to find trials with a certain type of cancer, so they will recommend if this person is able to apply for this trial. Also, AI solutions help us in management tasks, and it's possible to create questionnaires, chatbots, organize meetings, organize procedures, and a lot of simple tasks are possible to automate, and in major cases this work should be done as we just define a task which is being repeatedly made by human and apply an algorithm to automate it. In many cases it's possible. Also, there are examples that AI systems could be applied in telemedicine, because in this case all the data received by doctor will be available in digital form, and we are able to train our algorithms to perform the similar results, to provide similar results as doctors, and analyze the same sources of data as a doctor, and to train it based on previous actions of these doctors. So millions of recorded sessions of telemedical consultations will help us to train AI system to in some cases replace doctor, for example, with no connection. It could be a device with this recommendation system inside, and it could be applied when doctor is inaccessible. There are a lot of questions in discussion currently about regulations for artificial intelligence in medicine application, and for example, it's who's responsible for these decisions made by AI system. Is it a patient? Is it a clinic or owner of this AI system? Or maybe it will be doctors whose decisions were used to train it, or something like that. And currently there is legislation being developed, and standards for international standardization committee about AI application in medicine under development. And in many cases, AI application in medicine is related to Internet of Things and wearable devices, and gathering data from patients online. So this data gathering will help us to improve accuracy and efficiency of the systems, and as more data we gather, as better results we will have. In many cases, this technology is being applied without visual effect for us as a users. It could be tracking conditions of medical devices, monitoring situations in certain areas, providing business analytics and some insights, and it could be not clear that there is a AI system in this solution. Of course, one of the most important areas of application for AI is reducing the number of medical errors, because it's very costly to have these errors in lives, health, money, and if it's possible to apply a technology to reduce its numbers, it will be applied. It's certainly true. Of course, there is a lot of problems with application of such technologies. The major problem is data quality, and these systems are totally related on data which was used for training, and if data was incomplete in training dataset or in our samples which are being analyzed, results could be unpredictable, and quality of incoming data, similar ways how these forms are being filled by doctors, same standards, same names for values, and so on and so on. It's very important, and only after digital transformation of healthcare and converting all data gathering in a standardized way, we will be able to gain the full benefit of such systems. Of course, it's impossible to apply such systems on paper documents, and it's absolutely impossible to keep using some paper blanks and paper documents. In the real world, data is heterogeneous. There are different scales, measures, and sources data is incomplete, and there are different channels provide different level of completeness of the data. Inaccurate, some errors could be in this data, inconsistent, redundant, insufficient, unstructured, and so on. And it's possible to apply algorithms to deal with all these problems, and of course it's being done, but it's very important that we need to keep this data as clear as possible from beginning, so level of error will be lower. And of course there are problems which are related to human factor, and it's very important to understand correctly which could be done with AI and which is not. So it's very important to apply correct algorithms and correct methods to check if it is useful for current situation. And of course, in some cases, data scientists could apply something without testing on future data, and now it could provide a good result, but in a year or two it will have some deviations in quality. So there should be always indicators to test quality of this data, and we should always check the situation in some periods of time if something was changed. Getting back to data study process, it consists in understanding challenges, understanding data, processing data, gathering features, building models, optimizing parameters, control of retention, cross-solution validation, implementation, and operation. And if we just reduce one of the steps, results will not be couldn't be qualified as able to use in medicine. And on each stage we have risks related to our staff shortage, experience, data quality, and so on. And each this risk could be mitigated with easy and clear steps to reduce this risk to the minimum, so this data processing will be possible to apply. So as I told you before, many types of AI systems will work as a black box without us being able to check why we have these results. And in many cases, we should keep with machine learning statistical methods to be able to provide a proof for results if lives of the patients are being dependent on this data. And the most I guess popular question in this area: will artificial intelligence replace doctors in near future? And the simple answer is no. There will be always in current level of technology, we could only provide second opinion with AI system, but taking a few steps further, development of this technology will be able to provide a replacement for some types of specialists which are being involved in the most manual procedures with multiple checking of the same data from one day to another, for example, in radiology, in pathomorphology, dermatology, ophthalmology, and all the areas where we work with medical images. It is possible to apply machine learning and neural networks algorithms to process this data. But in more complicated areas, it is for sure that we will rely on human specialists for a huge amount of time. For example, in oncology, emergency medicine, infectology, neurology, and psychiatrics, and so on. So it's all for our course, IT, technology, and e-health. Thank you for watching, and I will be glad to stay in touch with you. Bye.